Action Memory Protection. It's an Apple News podcast set 20 years ago. Today, we're looking back to August 2001. I'm Josh McGrath, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Smith.
Hey, Josh, you check out that new video game console?
Yeah, the Valve Big Boy.
No, the Apple one.
Oh, the Apple? No, what's that? What's this? I've been away for a week, so what did I miss?
You haven't heard about the Apple Pippin?
Oh, the Apple Pip. That's a new Pippin?
No, the old one. It's coming back. They're bringing it back.
It's a beautiful little white cube. Beautiful boomerang controller. It's got everything you want. It's got a disk drive. It's got a fan. An amazing slate of games.
Hit me with them.
You got favorites like Anime Designer, Dragon Ball Z, Circus, Dazzleoids, Dinosaur Museum.
Wait.
Fort
Say that
Twila.
last one again.
Circus. No,
D1.
Dazzleoids.
Dazzle. Is that like Dazzle Lloyd?
Frankie Online. Internet Kit. Jungle Park.
Frankie Online, the sequel to Frankie Offline.
Kids Box.
What?
Kids Box.
Wait.
There's just a game here called Kids Box.
I want to hear more about this Dazzleoids.
I think we might need to do an entire episode about the Pippin.
I think you're right. We just got a new topic, everybody.
All right. This show is just about video games now. We've just given in to self-indulgence.
Yeah. Then we're gonna pivot over to Dreamcast only pretty soon.
I think we're past that.
All right, you want to move into QuickTime Machine?
I would love to do that.
We're going to have to cut that one short.
Yeah, buddy.
All right. Attention developers. Apple offers WWDC session recording. Some free, some discounted with a free WWDC PowerBook bag.
Ooh. Next, Connectix updates the virtual PC test drive for Mac OS X. Matt, why did you add this one?
I added it because I tried out Virtual PC back in the day.
Oh, what was it?
It was just like what VirtualBox is now.
Oh, okay.
But it's like, it's emulating the x86 processor on your PowerPC Mac. So it was garbage. It really didn't work at all. Like it was, if you needed to, I think I used it to convert documents of some sort. What did I use it for? No, that was Rosetta. Anyway,
it's super high performance though.
Yeah, really, no acceleration whatsoever. It's all running off the CPU, and it's an emulation layer, not like a virtualization like we have now because everything is Intel.
Speaking of high performance applications of technology.
Yeah, we got a Mac sighting. Orange iBook. Orange iBook assists in the production of The Lord of the Rings.
I guess.
Yeah, somebody working on the Lord of the Rings movie owned an iBook and it was photographed on set.
This is just making Mac fans look bad.
Oh my God! Look, it's got some
just
Mac. Finally, a big lie. So this is called the Apple Store is no threat to Mac retailers. A quick note to the mom and pop. So whatever sway the Mac Observer had back in the day, they were thought they were in a position to reinsure independent Mac repair shops that the Apple Store was no particular threat.
And it wasn't. End of the story. Happily ever after.
Yeah, and I think sort of, it's easy to see this in hindsight, but I think what they missed is that they were just in the process of opening app stores and setting everything up. But I think even in 2001, it would be hard to see that they sort of criticized the Genius Bar for not being a repair shop. But I don't think that they really understood what the purpose of that was.
Right.
And what it would become. I think they maybe, it's hard to see the forest through the trees there for sure. But I think they were don't worry about it. Independent Mac app repairs are here to stay. And that is definitely not the case.
No, they didn't. Oh, but actually there's another item here. One last thing. Don't let all the recent OS X news get you down. Apple's still releasing updates for OS 9.
That's right. Apple updates Mac OS 9 to 9.2.1.
And that's QuickTime Machine. We once again find ourselves, dear listener, in the doldrums of summer, where there just isn't that much news in our own time, let alone 20 years ago. So we bring you once again another special episode of Memory Protection.
A very special episode.
Someone will die.
Josh and I were texting back and forth about Metroid, of all things, after they announced the new Metroid Dread game for the Switch. And we were sort of like, there's an article on The Verge, and it's titled "Why It Took Nintendo 15 Years to Make Metroid Dread." And we were sort of theorizing that Apple and Nintendo might not be that dissimilar, taking their time designing products for people, designing sort of people first, or use case first. And
if I could just interject here, I was really struck by the idea that a company would let someone let a project languish for that long, or not languish, but like, I'm sure they weren't working on this game for 15 years, but they were waiting. Specifically the nugget of the story is like that they had this idea for the game. They said, this is what we want the game to be, but the technology just couldn't facilitate that. And they basically said, well, we'll wait and we'll wait and we'll wait. And did they make a different game instead during that time? Not really. No. Not in terms of a 2D Metroid. And it just struck me that like, they're willing to sort of play that long game there and wait for the product to be right. And that struck me as very Apple-like. And so we got to talking, what are the traits and philosophies that the two companies share, and how could comparing and contrasting those traits sort of illuminate both companies and maybe help us learn something new about each?
Sure.
So today we'll be talking about Apple and Nintendo.
Two peas in a pod.
Yes, the two
Pippins in a Nintendo.
Two companies with long histories and short history together, I'd say.
Well, not much of a history, but yeah, sure.
Nintendo is by my measurement, an ancient company. It's much older than most people know. It's actually nearly, is it over 100 years old at this point?
I believe that's right.
We're not going to spend too much time on history this time because, there's plenty of...
That's not what we do on this podcast.
Well, we try to sometimes, but rather than spending time just, reading you a Wikipedia article, we're going to talk more about the two companies' like philosophies and what we've sort of gleaned.
We'll get into some history, but we're not going to be devoted to it.
Yeah. So, despite what I just said, let's start with some history.
Sure, bud.
So, Nintendo started as a playing card printing company.
This Hanafuda cards, right?
Yes, Hanafuda cards. Did a good bit of business for many decades, but then in the sort of the mid 20th century, began branching out into a lot of different new businesses and some weird bets. Everything from a taxi service to a love hotel chain, and more successfully toy making. And in the 70s?
Yeah.
In the 70s, they hired a man named Gunpei Yokoi to work as a to work as a maintenance man on the Hanafuda printing machines. As it goes, this wasn't a very demanding job, so in his free time he would tinker in the on-premise machine shop, and he was very inventive, and he would make little toys and things. And the story goes that the then Nintendo president, I'm blanking, is it Yamauchi?
Yeah. Yep. Hiroshi Yamauchi
sort of discovered what he was doing, and the particular toy he had made, which was like an extending arm toy. And he said, this is what you're doing now. This is your new job, is making toys. And so from there on out, Gunpei began sort of heading up a division making new toys and eventually sort of a new R&D division as the company started getting interested in electronics.
Yeah, so he did a bunch of new stuff. He made a bunch of toys for them, and then in the 80s he invented a pretty popular product.
Story goes that Gunpei Yokoi was on a train traveling and was watching a bored businessman who was just sort of absent-mindedly playing with his calculator. And he wasn't doing any calculations. He was just pressing the buttons. And this sort of clicked in Yokoi's mind, where he's thinking, well, why not make something with that? At the time, there's a lot of competition over LCD manufacturing in Japan, as well as like microprocessors. And so there was just a lot of like cheap electronics around. And Gunpei Yokoi developed the Game & Watch, which is were a line of like LCD based like one-shot games. If you've ever played Super Smash Brothers, the newer ones, there's a character called Mr. Game & Watch, and he comes directly from that.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of and it's sort of like a precursor to all those like Tiger Electronics handheld games that we had here in the U.S. I mean, the Game & Watch was sold in the U.S., but I think probably 80s and 90s kids will probably remember the Tiger Electronics more than the Game & Watch. But, single screen games, LCDs pre-programmed with all the graphics built in, pretty simple stuff.
Because the Game & Watches were so successful, Nintendo put a lot more resources into electronic gaming.
Yeah.
And this led to several R&D divisions at Nintendo, several key hires, such as one Shigeru Miyamoto, and the eventual creation of games like Donkey Kong, Super Mario, Metroid, and The Legend of Zelda. But I think there's an important thing to bring up about Gunpei Yokoi and his and the philosophy that he sort of instilled at Nintendo.
Yeah, hit me with it.
So this is a wonderfully named philosophy called lateral thinking with withered technology.
Love this.
I know. It's so good. So this is this idea that if you can, try to take quote-unquote withered technology, which is sort of a mistranslation. What that means is like mature technology, stuff that's like well-established, well-known. There's not a lot of surprises to it. And as a byproduct, it's probably also cheap, right? And if you can take that cheap technology and just come at it sideways, right? And just think of a way to use it that no one else is thinking of. Like LCDs are really useful in calculators, and microprocessors. But until Gunpei Yokoi came along, no one had the idea to like use the same technology to make cheap little handheld video games, right?
Right.
And this is a strategy that would be used again and again at Nintendo, and arguably is still being used today. So
Gunpei Yokoi established this sort of trend of lateral thinking with withered technology, and that carried them through many of their console generations. And they kind of ran into some trouble in the early to mid aughts, and they kind of came back to it, this lateral thinking strategy, but in a different way with something that's called the blue ocean strategy.
So like the central metaphor is classic competition-based business is like a red ocean where there's competitors and they're fighting over limited resources and they're trying to gain an edge over other companies, and all this fighting draws blood and the ocean runs red, right? And instead
it's like a Game of Thrones.
Yes. And instead of jumping into that fray, the theory behind the strategy is that, like Matt said, you are looking for or just creating whole cloth, completely new, untouched markets. Sort of wrapping around all these ideas is like you're creating new markets, or you're like you're crossing segments of markets that don't get crossed before. So like the main example people give of this is the Nintendo Wii.
Right. This is the sort of classic blue ocean case study.
Right. And in fact, it's kind of the only one. It's sort of a dubious theory because Nintendo is the only like publicly it's like the only public like success story. But we're not here to judge the theory. But I think it is a useful lens through which to sort of understand how and why Nintendo makes certain decisions, right?
Sure.
So the Wii is like using, at that point, pretty well understood like RF and like gyroscope technology, right?
Right. Pretty cheap.
Right. Pretty cheap. They're using the same hardware as the GameCube, which was the previous console, so pretty cheap. And then they're putting all this stuff together to make this never before seen form factor, which is this motion controlled video game console, right?
Right.
And then they're marketing it towards families and really just non-gamers, right?
Right.
And the thing basically printed money for them.
Right. They weren't focused on, I think, at the point in which the GameCube era ended, Nintendo made a decision to sort of say, like, we're not going to chase the technology anymore to make more and more realistic games like Sony and Microsoft are doing. We're going to go over here. We're going to focus on the experience. We're going to find a new audience to play our games. And at that point, the technology doesn't even matter. And it worked out. And I think that's still working out.
Yeah, I think you could still see a lot of this theory in the behind the Switch, right?
Right.
Like it's a different kind of form factor that up until very recently had not been copied. The sort of like, I think, half mobile, half like sit down TV console idea, right?
Right. I think all of the consoles that they came out with since the Wii, I think the DS is an example of that concept. The
3DS, and the Wii U, like they're not always successful here, but they it's very clear to me that like they're playing their own game, right? They're not trying to, as you say, they're not trying to like chase specs and chase new, like bigger and better graphics. Like they're trying to create a completely novel experience that hopefully like attracts new buyers, right?
Right.
I think this is a good point where we should bring in our other friend, Apple.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot.
Start talking about how they might relate here, because I think on the surface there's a lot of similarities between the two companies.
And I think historically there have been a lot of similarities.
There's this great article where there's an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto where they're asking, this is around the era when Nintendo was making Super Mario Run, which is their iOS game. They released in 2015?
I think that's right. Yeah.
And
2015, 2016, something like that.
And they're asking like, to talk about Apple and how's it been working with Apple. And he says, well, he says something to the effect of like, he thinks that the two companies have pretty similar philosophies. And then he starts talking about the original Mac, and he starts talking about Apple and how they came into this market that was very complex and complicated for users, and they created something that was very like human centric, right?
Right.
And they were sort of, he remembers how they really made computers more approachable, and he says that he thinks that Nintendo tries to do the same thing with games, right?
Yep.
So I think in terms of design philosophy, there's so much the two companies share, but I think and I think you could say that there's a lot of like business philosophy they share, right? The sort of love of new product and but also of like tight hardware and software integration.
Sure. I think like the design of the product has always been a sort of focus of obviously not only Apple but Nintendo as well. Like thinking about Shigeru Miyamoto's previous comments about how like the reason they designed the Wii controller and the GameCube controller, like they're trying to create new play experiences, and there's, thinking about the people using it, not just the function that it serves. I
think they differ on things like ergonomics, right? I think Nintendo is way more willing to make sort of weird and maybe even ugly looking things sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is like very un-Apple.
Yeah.
But in terms of like software design, I think there's both a huge focus on like usability, or at least there has been. It's hard. It's one thing to keep in mind with a discussion like this is that these are both like living companies who are growing and changing over time, right? And they sometimes stray from certain philosophies or go back to them over time. And, I think we'll have to keep in mind that like on memory production, when we talk about Apple, we're talking about Apple in like almost in totality, right?
Yep.
And certainly I think we have a sort of a closer view on Apple. So we see how their design philosophies have sort of changed over time, especially as different people head up the design department.
Yep.
Speaking of leadership, I think it's important to note what is sort of the corporate philosophy behind Apple and how they make product decisions. And for me, that starts with the Cook Doctrine. Do you remember this?
No.
So this is a thing that gets referenced a lot in the Apple community. It's basically like when Tim Cook became the CEO, like pretty early on, there was an investor call where he made this speech. And this is where those classic lines come from. We believe that we need to own and control the primary technologies behind the products we make and participate only in markets where we can make a significant contribution. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, you ever heard that got brought up before?
Yes, that sounds familiar.
Right. And I think this gets used a lot to explain like, why did Apple enter this market? Right. There's two parts to it, right? There's the how does Apple decide to get into a market? And then, how does Apple make their products? Right. And I think it's pretty obvious, especially, you don't have to read just this statement to know like Apple likes control. We've talked about that a lot on this show, especially talking about like chips, like how chips are made and, the various hardware and supply chain things behind Apple devices.
Right. What happens to companies that don't deliver chips on time?
So for me, there's sort of, they get the boot.
They get their kneecaps broken.
Right. See, Apple or Nintendo doesn't have this problem because they just use old ass chips that nobody wants.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's sort of like the first divergence. I think that when we were doing this research, like, Nintendo's philosophy of like, let's focus on the experience first and the technology second, as opposed to Apple sort of gunning forward with both of those things at the same time.
Right. Like, I think it's interesting that like they're both, I never really thought about Nintendo this way until doing research, but they also really care about software and hardware integration, right?
Right.
Like they always build the hardware, like at least the chassis and the software themselves, right?
Right.
Which is, a classic strength of it behind Apple's products. But, it's lateral thinking with withered technology could not be less own and control, right? Like it's like Nintendo is like free. They're sort of like, we'll just go with whatever is sort of out there. Like they don't want to have to be in charge of it, right?
Sure. But I also wonder if that creates opportunities for Nintendo to become in charge of it, right? Like we're talking about cheap LCDs and like, yes, they're used in calculators, but then what happens when Game & Watch blows up, or what happens when they need 2 million LCD units for the next shipments of Game Boys? Like suddenly they've sort of flipped the switch where like, yeah, they were using the technology because it was cheap, but now they can control that market and keep it cheap.
Yes, but I never get the sense that they're like fabbing their own chips, right? Or designing chips rather, or they're not like buying up like Gorilla Glass or like Sapphire, Sapphire glass companies, like Apple is like, especially in more recent years, like very extreme about this, right? To the point where we have now, almost all Apple devices using, or soon to be almost all Apple devices using their own chips that they design and, built in a supply chain that they control very heavily. Right.
Right.
Which is why I say like, this is very like Nintendo is not doing this, which I think is very interesting for a company that does really prize sort of like vertical integration. Right. When we talk about like own and control with Apple, it often seems like a sort of anxiety for Apple.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, we have to control this because we just can't stand like having to rely on other people. Right. But like Nintendo just seems happy to do that. I don't know if they're happy, but it's certainly core to their philosophy in terms of like product development. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes that gets them through. Like right now, part of there was all these rumors that Nintendo was going to release a new Switch model. And they did, but it was like it it was not in line with the rumors, which is that it was going to be, oh, it's going to be so cool. It's going to have new chips. It's going to be 4K. It's going to, it's going to do all these things, that are people are expecting. If you expect Nintendo to be sort of trying to compete with the PlayStation 5, right?
Right.
That's not the game they're playing. But also, so they released this Switch OLED model, which is like, it has the same exact chips. The only difference is like the kickstand and the screen, right?
Right.
And part of what people were wondering is like, well, let's say that there was some fire behind the smoke here of all these rumors. But maybe Nintendo was holding off because of the global chip shortage, right?
Sure.
And they're able to just keep pumping out Switches because they're using these old, easy to fab chips. These like NVIDIA Tegra chips, right?
Right.
And it's like, just no sweat off their brow, right? Everyone else is out here like like Sony and Microsoft are at each other's throats trying to get, NVMe sticks or whatever.
Right.
And it's just not happening, right? But Nintendo, I don't think as much has that problem for that reason. I think another subtle difference between the two companies that sort of illustrates both philosophies is that you think about like, how does Apple enter new markets, right? So just like using Tim Cook's own words, we only, gonna only participate in markets where we can make a significant contribution. Now, whether or not you agree that like the HomePod is a significant contribution to like smart speakers, like I think it's useful to sort of use that lens to look at their decision making, right? I think normally when you look at Apple products, they are new entries to an existing market, right?
Sure.
And
but they're not the first.
They're really rarely the first, right? They're usually
right.
Apple. The game they're trying to play is like, let's make the best version of this thing, right?
Yeah, and I think I would argue that people are often complaining that Apple is not fast enough to these markets.
Well, especially nowadays, right?
Sure.
But if you look back to like, let's say start with like the iPod.
What's an iPod, Josh? This is August of 2001. We don't know what an iPod is.
Anachronism. Like Apple swoops in with this like with a new type of MP3 player, which was it was an existing market at the time. Lots of different products, right? But none of them were very good.
Right. And
they make a really good MP3 player, but it's not just that. They also create a new way to buy music, right? And to manage your music.
Yeah.
And what is the result of that? They completely upturned the music industry, right?
Yeah.
Setting a standard that it like has impacted the way music is produced and distributed to this day, even in the streaming era.
Complete and total domination of portable computing.
Right.
Until the end of time.
And then you get to smartphones, and it's like smartphones was an existing category, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Apple made the best version of it.
I guess I would say smartphones are pretty new.
What I meant to say was like cell phones and feature phones and like the BlackBerry sort of era of
or a Palm phone.
Palm Pilots. Yeah, so like PDAs. That's more what I meant. Sorry, smartphones was a term of art sort of introduced by the iPhone and its copycats, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't just a really good. It wasn't just a really good phone and a microcomputer. It was like a new way to sell software, right?
Yep.
So it completely upturned the way we sort of think about application development, right? And the way they are produced and distributed. So like there's I'm sure you could come up with more examples. Like those are the two big ones, obviously. But I think the key point I'm trying to make here is that Apple tried to go into existing markets and make them as red as possible, right? To really churn up the blood, in terms of like, this is how Nintendo might think of it, right? So they are classically what you might call like disruptors, right? They disrupt industries. While both companies are really interested in innovation, I don't think Nintendo is interested in disrupting anything. Like they're much more seeking to add non-consumers to markets.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think it's really interesting to look to see a sort of like Blue Ocean is like, if you look into it, like explicitly non-disruptive. Like it's not about like like destroying or like really upturning existing industries. It's just about creating something new, which I think is it's like novel and sort of, I don't know, like feels better to me.
Sure.
If I can say that.
Yeah. I mean, again, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar corporations making expensive goods.
Right. For sure.
But
although
yeah,
less so with Nintendo, I'd say.
I mean, I would say a $350 piece of electronics is a fairly expensive item. I mean, I know in the scope of a PS5 or a Xbox Series X, maybe not, but I think
I like compared to Apple, which their products are an order of magnitude more expensive. I guess
that's fair. Yeah.
Can I make a point there?
Of course.
I think with their technology, really does well with if your core audience is like kids.
Yeah.
Because the thing with kids is, this is just me sort of riffing, is like kids are almost never the buyer, right, of a product.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, for the simple fact that they don't have money, right?
Right.
So you have this, like, if your target market is kids, you have this sort of unfortunate situation where you have a middleman, right, in between like the seller and the target audience. Parents just don't understand. So you have to like you have to convince the parent that it's worthwhile to buy this electronic and give it to the kid who might just break it the next day, right?
Right.
So I think the idea that if you make the devices as cheap as possible, sort of makes that an easier conversation if you are mostly targeting your goods at children, right? And I think even though like adults are certainly a big part of Nintendo's market, like kids are huge kids.
Big kids, huge kids. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's something I see more and more, like as my daughter becomes more and more interested in video games. Like I definitely like see the other side of that now, like having been a consumer of video games since I was 10, right? Like I was the kid at one point, but I haven't been that kid for such a long time. And I know that when I was first getting into video games in the sort of like late 80s, early 90s, my parents, I think they understood what it was, but certainly not to the degree that I understood what they were, right? Mm-hmm. And the other side of that is that all of my video game consoles were secondhand for the most part. So I was purchasing used stuff that was already busted and indented.
That's how it started.
Yeah. So I think the other side of that is Nintendo makes their products pretty hardy because they know that audience exists. They know that that's their audience. Okay, those original Game Boys are huge and chunky, but if you take one apart, there's a lot of room in there for stuff to fall and break. Right.
Well, there's another example where like they had the choice. Look at the Game Boy's competitors. What do you have? Like the
Game Gear and the Atari Lynx.
Yeah, the Game Gear and the Lynx, and like those were color devices, right?
Right.
And I believe it was Gunpei Yokoi's decision to prioritize battery life and just use the old like monochrome displays on the old Game Boys, and it made them like last a lot longer, and it like contributed heavily to their success.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Because like what happened, like your Game Gear takes 6 batteries and is dead within a couple hours, or your Game Boy takes 4 batteries and lasts for 10 or 12.
So I think this is something I've been toying around with. I didn't really come to any conclusion about it, but like this is less so with Apple today, but I think it's something you see more with like, say, like the iMac G3, where it's like there's a sort of idea that Apple computers are somewhat underpowered, right?
Yep.
At least.
Well, I think that was certainly the case in the Power PC era.
Right.
Well, actually, no. I'm sorry. I take that back because I think that refrain comes back even through that Intel transition. Everybody complained that the Apple's Intel Macs were slower than similarly spec'd PCs.
But of course, this is like a megahertz Smith thing, right?
Sure.
And it's not really about the technology per se. It's about how you use it and how you present it, right?
Right.
And I feel like this is a way in which they are similar, right? Let's like not just make the most out of sort of bad technology, but figure out how to make it good.
Yeah, or use that integration between hardware and software to really, or they leverage the power that they have as a hardware and software vendor to to make that experience cohesive and as fluid as possible, because they know, and I think even with Nintendo, like, yes, they're using a NVIDIA Tegra processor, but like they wrote the software for the processor specifically so they could take advantage of it, right? So they're the ones that know it in and out.
Right. They build the developer tools for people to like put their games on the Switch.
Right. And Apple's still in the transition from x86 to Apple Silicon, so they don't fully own their platform yet. So they're under the same sort of restrictions that somebody like Nintendo would be, where they're writing the best software they can for the hardware available to them. But I think also like controlling that software stack is powerful. Like they're not, they can do exactly what they want.
Right. I mean, I was reading this one review where they're saying at Nintendo, like there's a lot of like conversation between the hardware and software divisions, where like the hardware people might say like, oh, we have this idea to use this chip, and how could you use that? And they'll go and talk to the UI folks and be like, oh, and they'll have some idea, and they'll bounce back and forth. Or like it might go the other way, where the software teams, they'll have this sort of idea, this theme for the console or the way that you play games, and they'll go back to hardware and say, can you make this happen? Right.
Yeah.
And they have this sort of like interplay. And then you go look at Apple, and
they're doing something completely different.
They are, but also like at Apple, like design comes first, right?
Right.
Like the design team sort of sets the pace.
Yeah.
And then the executive, there's like the central executive team. You got Phil, you got
Power Phil,
you got Ruby, you got Avi, you got Steve. Actually, I don't know if this was true back then, but nowadays I think the way it works is like the executive team meets with design every week, and then they go over every single product that the company is working on.
Right.
And they make decisions about it. Right.
Yep.
And they can do that because there's not that many of them, or at least there weren't.
Right.
And then they have this like crazy, did you read about this? This like crazy manufacturing iteration process they do?
A little bit. Yeah.
The industrial design team comes up with the specs, and then they set it off to their manufacturers in China. And this is just to build like the prototype for something.
Right.
But they actually like build it like it would be. And then they fly it back to Cupertino, play with it, and then make iterations, send it back to China, make a new one, and they keep doing this back and forth.
Oh, wow.
And it's like super expensive, which I think is part of why their R&D costs are so high. But
sure.
And then obviously interleaved with all this is like the software teams, I should say, are, they're at least when they're allowed to, I think they're speaking with hardware design, right? And they're all, and I think the key here is like the central executive team is sort of orchestrating everything and keep making sure that things are well integrated, right?
Right.
And I think Nintendo is doing something similar, but they just seem a lot more like chill.
Well, I think the distinction, right? The latest Daring Fireball episode, Matthew Panzarino and John Gruber talk about this a little bit. I just listened to it today, so it's top of mind. But I think Apple does this, but I think the distinction being Apple has 3 Switch models right now.
Nintendo
has 3 Switch models right now. They have the Switch, the original, the Switch Lite, which is a portable only, and then the Switch OLED. The only distinction is one of them doesn't have removable controllers, and the other one has a better screen and a new kickstand. But otherwise, everything inside of the thing is exactly the same.
Right.
They're not iterating the processor or the hardware or those specs, right? And I think that might be a distinction and an advantage to Nintendo, where they sort of like they get 5 to 7 years to learn, write for it, optimize, and like master this single set of hardware, whereas Apple gets what, 9 months maybe to develop a product before it needs to be ready to produce and go to market.
Nintendo seems freer to sort of not just experiment, but like like I guess to build on what you're saying, like let people get access to the technology over the years, and then just sort of slowly iterate the same product. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing for like the iPhone, right? Where it's like this is maybe an analog to say like the DS, right? Where you look at like the line of DS products over the years, and it's just there's a ton of them to begin with, and they're all iterations on the last one, right? It's like there's much more time in between them, right, than an iPhone, obviously.
Right. Yeah, but I guess fundamentally those like new DS models, except for like the new DS or the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL, like there's only a couple models that are distinct in that way, where the processors are different or faster.
Right.
Most of them are just optimizations on the existing hardware.
And they've done a ton of work over the years to make sure like games are backwards compatible, and that stopped being the case so much going into the future, especially as like digital games became more the way you access them. But that's so like it's a good decision. Like it's a good it's like a shrewd business choice, right? But it is also sort of like generous in a way, right? To say like we're not going to make you buy just like all new versions of all these games.
Right.
I think a lot of that is motivated by just like simple economics of like, again, I think that if your target market is kids, the buyers are going to be parents, and you have to convince them, right?
Right.
You
don't have to spend all this money on new software.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas like Apple is, more than happy to have you buy all new stuff for the new thing, right?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe similarly, like if I buy a new iPhone, all my software comes with it.
That's true. There's a lot of software interoperability, if that's maybe not the right term, but compatibility rather.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and even like obviously on the iPhone, but on the Mac too. Like they. The 32 to 64-bit transition has been really long and drawn out.
Right.
So I'm not saying that what I should say is that they do a good job with that on software. It's more on the hardware front where they're more willing to break things, so to speak.
Yeah, but those changes are pretty.
Like I can't put headphones in my iPad. Oh,
yours doesn't have a headphone jack anymore?
No, it has a USB-C. That's it. And I have a dongle. Before you get mad at me, I have a dongle, but it's the Apple one, and it sounds bad. It doesn't work very well.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I can't believe they did that on the iPad.
Yeah, no, it sucks. It's a bad decision.
What a drag. My iPad has a headphone jack.
So I mostly use my AirPods to do stuff, including edit this podcast, which is getting harder.
Yeah, how are those AirPods working?
I can edit maybe half an hour of the podcast, maybe 40 minutes before they die. This is Josh from the future, and my AirPods literally died as I was listening to this. All right. That's all.
Oh, no. Oh, that's a drag.
How do we pull? Do you have anything else to say about this?
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure if I have a conclusion, which might be unsatisfying.
We'll drum something up. We usually do.
All right. I guess
So what is the point of this conversation?
I think when we came into this, I was thinking, and I think we were both thinking like, oh, Apple and Nintendo seem very, very similar.
They do, but they're not.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, upon any sort of investigation, we realize, there's some pretty vast and unique differences between the two.
Well, so I think, so here's an interesting maybe final segment is that it's one thing to talk about their philosophies in isolation, but these two companies have interacted,
right,
in the past, and may continue to interact. There's a sort of like obvious stuff like in recent years, Nintendo has started to make iOS games here and there.
Yep.
Let's see, there's Mario Run, which I think did okay. There's some Animal Crossing stuff. Kart,
Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem.
Yeah. And I think it's been like okay.
I thought Mario Run was excellent.
No, the games are good, but it's more like, are they performing? Are they up to snuff for what Nintendo's expecting? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would say other than Mario Run, I think all of the other games have been a little bit lackluster.
Right. It sort of seems like sometimes they don't really have their heart in it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Which is not surprising because it's like, what would motivate a company that develops its own video game hardware to create, and it creates its own games for that hardware, to port some of that IP or to develop new games using that IP on someone else's platform that they do not control, right?
Yeah, I think it almost feels like that mobile iOS, Android software push for app or for Nintendo was a little bit of a hedge. Because all of that stuff happened right before and right around the Switch announcement and launch.
Right.
So, and I think Apple, or oh my God, I keep doing this.
They're so similar.
I guess in retrospect, it feels like maybe Nintendo had a little bit of like we got to test out mobile because if we have another Wii U on our hands, we're in real trouble.
Right. Well, here's an idea. Is someone who Apple has disrupted their market somewhat?
Who's that?
Nintendo.
Oh,
like one of Nintendo's like biggest markets over historically has been like mobile casual gaming, right?
Right.
They owned that market for decades.
Yeah.
But then the iPhone and smartphones writ large, I think, have completely rewritten the rules of that market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like insofar as Nintendo is very successful with their handhelds, I think it doesn't really even compare. Like it's like a drop in the bucket in comparison to the App Store.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so much more of a cash cow. And I think that's sort of like, that's the convenience, right? I've always got my phone on me. But I will say, I mean, anecdotally, I would say from 2010 to 2015, I played a boatload of mobile games. It's just, I was really into it, loved them.
You see that Jetpack Joyride? It's on Apple Arcade.
Yeah.
You're talking about games from this era, like, Temple Run and, this sort of like, I think of as like sort of the heyday of mobile games, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, what were you trying to say?
Oh, I think as time wore on, I think I realized that I really loved the idea of mobile gaming. And I think I always have. Like I had a Game Boy, had a Game Boy Advance, had a Nintendo DS. And I always had, like, for the most part, with some exceptions, like I've always been a big fan of, Nintendo and their flagship titles. But I've always loved portable gaming. So I think once I realized, like, the Wii U is not Nintendo's best console. That's what I played Breath of the Wild on. I played mostly on the handheld, and while it was not the ideal experience, it was exactly how I wanted to play the game.
Well, you'll notice that like most of the early Switch first party titles were just all Wii U games.
Oh, they're still
no one had played. Right.
Lateral thinking with withered technology. It counts for software too.
It counts for software too. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was a great strategy, right? Like, and I think that was probably a strategy built into the Switch. Like, how can we make sure that whatever we build next, we can take all this great work we've already done and bring it to the new platform so people could experience all of these great games we made that nobody ended up playing.
There's this another interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, I think earlier in the 2010s, where they're asking him about what he thinks about the App Store and whether or not they will make the DS eShop more like the App Store.
Yeah.
And he has this line where he's like, maybe we'd have to make a lot more developer tools to make that possible. I love if you read it, well, Matt will obviously put some of these in the show notes, but like Miyamoto is here's a big difference from Nintendo. A big difference between Apple and Nintendo is like, at least with Miyamoto, and I think with a lot of the other execs, they're a lot more humble about things. They're very open about like there's a few articles where like Miyamoto's like talking openly about like, oh well, yeah, this product failed, or I think it didn't do this well because of these reasons, and he usually has some sort of like theory behind it. But the fact that he would talk about that at all, sort of like with no shame, right?
Right. It's not something Apple would do.
But that line about the developer tools, it made me think like, this is an article written maybe like 2012, 2010 or something. I was like, well, they did that. Like they built a lot more developer tools. They made it a lot easier for people to make games for them. And that's why the Switch is so full of like indie games, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many more games than you'd usually find on a Nintendo platform. And I think they are having to sort of react to Apple's place in the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they more and more are having to play other people's game, right, to keep sort of relevant. But I'm interested to see where things go next for them, because I don't see them ever, chasing speeds and feeds, right? I think that's core to their corporate philosophy, that they're just not going to be like, we're just going to make another box, right?
Right.
That has like 4K ray tracing or whatever. Like that's not what they're about, right?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Thinking about the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 and all these things, like the Nintendo at the time it was released was already a few years old because it was a Japanese console first,
right,
before they brought it to the market.
Right.
The Super Nintendo, I think, famously has slower processors in it
than the Sega.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or there are some aspects of it that are slower, and I think Nintendo, I think once it got to the 3D graphics like Nintendo 64 and the GameCube era, those seemed like huge leaps because technologically everybody was making those huge leaps.
Right, but they were still underpowered compared to like the PlayStation, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm not sure if Nintendo 64 and how they compare in terms of like their like raw output or whatever. But yeah, I would say the PlayStation ended up being able to do more sophisticated things than the Nintendo 64. And then certainly like the GameCube was was probably on a little on par with the PS2. That was the same era, right? PS2 and GameCube.
Yes.
Yeah. And the GameCube is kind of the last time they sort of tried to keep up.
Yeah, it seems like it, right?
But I think it was like, Nintendo 64, GameCube, those were the two times they tried to keep up. And that didn't work out great. Like those were not great best-selling consoles, although there's a lot of love for them.
Right.
Then they went to the Wii. They essentially said, let's not iterate too much on the core hardware side. Let's focus on that experience. They went to the Wii U, which was a bit of a sidestep and a misstep, but then that expanded into the Switch.
Right,
so from the GameCube to the Switch, like certainly like there have been like technological and graphical improvements, but if you go from the PS2 to the PS5, like it's night and day, whereas the GameCube to the Switch is not quite as obvious.
Yeah, right. But here's the thing. It's got Mario.
Bing bong.
It's got Link.
That's all I want.
Sometimes they fight. Sometimes they drive. And it's really fun. And that's all people need, right?
Right. And I think Nintendo's like proof positive that like the latest and greatest technology isn't the be all and end all of video games.
I think that's true. And I think that their sort of Wii era strategy of let's really focus more on non-gamers, like non-consumers, as a potential place for new value is really smart, and I think would have continued to be all they needed if Apple had come along and started screwing with their money, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And now I think they're in sort of a pickle, right? Because it's like I think they can. There's this thing like John Syracuse talks about a lot about in this world of like. I think he has often asked the question like, why is a video game console necessary, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what is the point of a video game console, especially if you look at like a PlayStation or an Xbox, which is just a PC,
right?
Especially in the Xbox's case, right? It's literally just a PC that is like that you don't have to manage, right?
Right.
And it's like a convenience thing for the most part.
Sure.
But I think Nintendo is the only one who's really continues to prove the necessity, if not necessity, then just like the value of having bespoke devices, right?
Yes.
In that they, because of inputs and a sort of focus on interesting and novel gameplay experiences, mm-hmm. And doing only that, right? Focusing really heavily on that, not always successfully. But still always focusing on that. I think they continue to prove the viability of that market. But of course, that's like a very tenuous thing, because it's like it really depends on like creativity and invention, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't. It's not every year that you come up with motion control gaming, right? And even Nintendo like struggles to sort of maintain that, maintain interest in that. And certainly the other console makers, you know, at least in terms of like motion controls, like they had like zero success.
Right.
You know, things like
Kinect was pretty successful, wasn't it?
Was it like, are people talking about Kinect games? Like everyone's still talking about Wii Tennis, right? Wii Sports Resort.
Wii.
Like,
they should just bring Wii Sports back to the Switch.
I'm honestly like, there are motion controls on the Switch, but they're just not as good as the Wii.
Is that the case? I thought the accuracy was way better now.
Is it?
I thought it was supposed to be, but
can it? How can that be with like when there's no like?
Because I think it's like the Wii Motion Plus technology.
I mean, maybe it is just easier now. Hell, I mean, I just bought a new LG TV, and the TV remote is basically a Wiimote.
Oh, weird.
And there's no bar or anything, like you don't have to fiddle with it. So maybe it is just easier. Maybe the technology has advanced. Who knows? Maybe they will bring it back. I think what would be interesting is like, you know, speaking of going back to Gunpei Yokoi, like one of his final product for Nintendo was the ill-fated Virtual Boy.
Oh boy,
right? And he didn't quit because of it, but it didn't help. But he ended up retiring.
Well, I thought he did quit because.
I think it's like depending on who you read.
Okay.
Like some people say, I think maybe in his biography he says like he was planning to retire anyway.
Well, he didn't retire though. He went on to something else.
Well, retire from Nintendo.
Okay.
But anyway, you know, Nintendo has sort of unsuccessfully dabbled with virtual reality in the past, and I think that would be really difficult for them to do as based on their philosophy. But in terms of like what kind of like technology they use, but in terms of like novel, joyful experiences, that feels like really like I want to talk about blue ocean. Like that feels like a rich vein that they could explore. Mm. But again, I don't really see it happening.
I mean, they tried it with Labo, right?
Is that like put your phone in some cardboard VR or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Put your Switch in the cardboard VR helmet and you can play Zelda in 3D.
Oh, you want to talk about withered technology? Nothing's more withered than cardboard.
For sure.
That's some Gunpei Yokoi stuff right there.
There you go.
Making toys.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking while we were discussing the sort of like lineage between the Wii and the Switch, that the Switch is really just another iteration on the Wii.
Oh, for sure. It's just a different. I mean, it's what they wanted for the Wii U. So if people don't know, like the Wii U was the thing that came after the Wii, and it was the central idea there was that it was a 2-screen device, right?
Right.
So you could play it on the TV, or it also had like the controller had a screen on it, right?
Yeah, it had like a 4.7 inch screen it's pretty low resolution, and the controller was.
And was it like
bigger than the Switch?
Was it like streaming from the Wii U, or was it the controller of the Wii U?
Yeah,
like
it had some sort of modified Wi-Fi spec to stream the audio and video.
And like you could play the game while someone else used the TV to do something else, for instance, right?
Yep.
And it was a motion controller, and also it had you could use a stylus on the screen. But it wasn't like very elegant and self-contained, at least not in the way that like the Switch is, right? So I think you're right. Like there's definitely a lineage there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean the obvious of like the Wii U being a proto Switch, but even just like thinking about the Switch and its removable controllers, and them also being motion controllers, and the sort of like blue ocean, let's find an audience for these games that doesn't exist. Like I think that all of those ideas sort of carry through to the Switch and make that concept even more accessible. Yeah.
I feel like that is somewhat muddied with the Switch, where like you could play like The Witcher 3 on the Switch or Doom, and you know they're not the best versions.
Sure,
to put it lightly.
I mean I haven't played The Witcher,
or
I'm
like
never gonna play Doom.
You can play Hitman 3 or Control on the Switch using streaming services. Like there's a new idea of like the hardware doesn't matter if you can just stream it to the box, right?
Yes. And I
that's interesting, I think, in terms of like a Nintendo philosophy.
So I think this would be another potentially interesting topic, but I use the NVIDIA GeForce Now service.
GeForce Now?
GeForce Now. And that's like bring your compatible Steam library games to our service and you can stream them from our data center. It's really good.
How's that working for you out there? You got some good internet pipes out there?
Yeah, bud.
Oh.
I usually don't have that many problems. I'll get some stutters and some latency, but I'm not playing games that I'm not playing Doom, like but I think like, we were talking about PS5 and Xbox and the Switch, and a lot of people are theorizing that the next generation of console is either going to be the last generation of physical consoles or this generation, that everything's going to be a streaming service. And Microsoft is already moving in that direction. Like they've got their xCloud service. You can already subscribe to it now and you can play all of the Xbox games streaming. You don't need an Xbox. PlayStation has a version of this, but I don't know how integrated it is or how well it works. And thinking about Nintendo and their desire to focus on the experience of playing with their consoles, like I could see Nintendo continuing to make consoles well into the future if they continue to iterate on that play experience. Like, I don't know if that's going to be easy for them, knowing that like the Switch is their most successful console they've ever made at this point.
Right. Which I think is but in a big part is because, again, of the games, right?
Well, sure.
Like that's always like, no matter like regardless of what the hardware is doing, that matters, right? But ultimately, like people won't play Mario.
Right. Well, and I think there's a big test for Nintendo coming up with the Steam Deck.
Right.
Like,
which is this new console that got announced like very recently in our own time, which is made by the company Valve, and it's basically a Switch but running like Steam library games, right? Windows PC games, right, although running on Linux, right?
Right.
And it has like 4K output to a TV, and like it does all these crazy specs, and like it weighs like 10 pounds. It's basically it's a Game Gear.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it would be the analogous to a Game Gear, to Nintendo's Game Boy. Yeah, but I think the Switch sort of opened a lot of people's eyes up to the idea that like people love portable gaming. People want to like game on their couch, and that maybe fidelity and graphical quality is secondary to the like experience they can have and the gameplay.
Right.
That they can play the way they want to play.
But not just portability, but like hybrid modality, right? Where it's like, and you see this also with the other consoles where, like Sony has their, I forget what it's called, but I think both Sony and Microsoft have ways where you can like stream games from your console to like your iPhone, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, you just throw in like a backbone controller or whatever, and boom, you're playing, Persona 4 or whatever on your iPad.
Right. And I think all of those things, those are all great, but I'm not sure Sony and Microsoft's value proposition is like there yet. Like I don't want to spend $500 to stream PS5 games to my phone.
Well, but it might be there with Microsoft with Game Pass. I don't know if you've used Game Pass much, but it's like they've got it figured out.
But that's the streaming service, right?
Yeah, or just access to games, I guess, too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. You're subscribing.
So for listeners, like this is this idea that that's sort of a Netflix model for games where you pay a subscription price and then you get access to a library that you could either download or I think in some cases, like Matt said, stream.
Yeah. Now Netflix is getting into games too. So Netflix is going to be the Netflix of game.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh boy. You know who's really the sleeping giant here?
Karnov,
who will never, who probably will never be a threat to any of these companies, weirdly, except for Nintendo, I guess, is Apple. Just kind of, even though they have the world's largest gaming market, like just sort of don't care about games for some reason.
Yeah,
like they just like I'd say like culturally don't care about games.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, they even have like a gaming service.
I think it's just such small potatoes. Like you look at the sales numbers for like even the Wii, and it's in the millions, but it's nothing compared to like iPhones.
Sure. Yeah, but I also wonder if it is like the market is so big for them that they don't have to try that hard.
But like I laugh because like we're like, oh, what chip is the new Switch gonna have, and what or like if we just compare the specs. He's like, the last year's iPad has it's a much more powerful chip than the Switch, right?
Right.
Like the iPad that was out when the Switch came out was already more powerful. Like, and it just keep like Apple has everything they need, like to like eat everyone's lunch, but it's just they have completely different priorities, and it's just this. It's very. I think it is just small potatoes to them. It's just never going to be a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Like they have everything. They have like the hardware, software integration. They have their own like rendering engine software. Like they
actually have a game service.
They have a game service, right? And it's like they put some resources behind it, but
hey, we're getting Jetpack Joyride back.
Yeah, baby. Angry birds. These birds. Have you heard about these birds, Matt?
Yeah.
They're angry.
They're mad.
I'm going to go run through this temple. I'm going to cut this rope. Or this fruit.
Is Temple Run on Apple Arcade now?
Oh, it's coming. I guarantee you it's coming.
It's weird to think of like Jetpack Joyride as like a retro game.
I know. That's honestly terrifying. I installed it though. It's fun.
I'll probably install it too. I remember enjoying that game quite a bit.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for August 2001. Not that we talked about August 2001 all that much. That's okay, though. What do you want for nothing? A rubber biscuit? You can find us on Twitter at MemProShow, or you can send us an electronic message using the address memoryproductionshow@gmail.com. Our World Wide Web address is memoryproduction.show. Go there to find the show notes.
If you want to keep listening, we will settle the Karnov debate once and for all. We've got a letter from a listener.
After the music, let's get it. All right. Welcome to Recommendations Record Scratch. Nope.
We're talking Karnov again.
Talking Karnov again. This is a Nintendo heavy episode, so we figure we pack it all in here.
Yeah.
You want to review what the situation is?
Okay. So for those that are new to the MemPro Karnov saga, well, I don't remember how this started.
You played Karnov or you recommended Karnov. Or didn't recommend it?
I didn't recommend it.
You talked about Karnov in one of our recommendation segments, and you totally slacked it off.
And then because we know that listener Aaron loves Karnov, I went back and I was criticizing it, not having played it for 20 years. So I went back through and I played it, and we talked about it on June's episode. Talked about my playthrough on June's episode.
Right. And you were once again very critical, even though you had just played it and it was fresh, right?
Right. Yes.
And so listener Aaron had some thoughts about this.
Right. So we'll read the email.
All right. I got to pick a voice for Aaron.
Hey, everybody.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Aaron, listener Aaron. I've never met this person, so I don't know what he sounds like. I'm sure he sounds like a big old nerd, though. No. All right. I'll do a respectful voice for Aaron, who I've never met. It's a stranger to me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So, Karnov. First, I think it needs to be said that judging games that were made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with our future game design eyes can be a bit problematic. While we can look back and say that some of those games were not very well designed by today's standards, the standards at the time were obviously very different, or non-existent, and resulted in a wide array of interesting, creative efforts of varying quality. I won't defend all of those efforts, but I will say my piece on Karnov. What makes Karnov great is the world. You play a fire-breathing Russian strongman who traverses truly bizarre and varied levels full of creatures from different mythologies and folklore. The creature designs are all over the place, in a fun way, and the oversized boss sprites are very compelling. Even the music, while repetitive, is fun and different. Throw in a child's imagination and you have a winner. Are the jump mechanics weird and floaty? Yes, but I don't think that detracts from the experience. Some of the truly great Nintendo classics have horrible jump mechanics. Think about jumping in Castlevania or Double Dragon. It's terrible. But if you're willing to work with them, you get into a groove and you build that muscle memory. Once upon a time, working around game controls was very normal. Not everything was Mario. The special item selection is very strange and somewhat difficult to execute. However, I will give them credit for trying something different and having such a large variety of power-ups. At the end of the day, I think the observation here mostly boils down to a difference of play philosophy. I have always been more than happy to work around difficult and frustrating game mechanics, especially if they're from the Nintendo era. I'm just that kind of gamer. You have to say it like that. I'm just that kind of gamer. I like that Dark Souls experience because you have to earn the progress, and you have to hate yourself just a little bit. I will also note that it is interesting to hear such harsh criticism of NES-era titles from someone that has nothing but adoration for every single Sega Dreamcast offering. Zing, Aaron. P.S. Just climb the ladder and shoot sideways to kill the mummies. The projectiles will go under your feet.
That's actually a great tip. Thank you for that.
PPSS, I love you. Keep making podcasts. And then this won't be useful for the listeners, but he did send me a video just today, actually.
Is it a Synth Ninja video?
No, it's a video of him. It opens on an NES on the ground, just sort of surrounded by zapper guns and NES cartridges, and it pans up to a Sony Trinitron with the text, "Congratulations, the end." So Aaron has also
so he did it.
He has also just completed Karnov once again.
I will say, Aaron, you bested me because
he says he claims that he beat Karnov in one go and got hit once.
I mean, Aaron has been playing Karnov since he was a child. It's a very long time.
Aaron only plays Karnov. He just plays it every day.
He plays Karnov and Dark Souls and only those two games.
He's a real gamer.
Yeah.
So I think let's talk about this. I think what I think is sort of the central idea here is like, can you use today's standards to criticize old games? And do you not to put words in your mouth, but do you feel like that is sort of the idea here?
I mean, I think no matter what happened, what I say, it's tough, right? Like there's nothing I can say or do if I say like, no, I don't think that's fair. It doesn't matter because I will always be judging 70s, 80s, and 90s games with today's viewpoint. I would like to think that I could sort of like adjudicate this game fairly on its own merits. I think it's always going to be tough because of the 25 years of experience I've had since I played Karnov for the first time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it is it's hard to divorce your it's not really a bias, but like knowledge, like experience of better things, right?
Right. But I think at the same time, my initial criticism of Karnov was based on what the Karnov game I played in the late 80s, early 90s on the NES. Like I remember vividly how difficult and frustrating the jump mechanic was.
Okay, so you're saying it's not just old Matt with his old hands and old eyes who can't
exactly
play video
right.
games anymore. You're talking about Kid Matt hated this game too.
Right. It is that, right, where old Matt has to save scum his way through Karnov because he doesn't have He doesn't have 6 days to master it.
Oh, you need these 6 days? No, you can't just do it in one day.
Hey, I'm no Aaron. And I think the other distinction is like the sort of like the love for the game, right? Like I played this game when I was a kid, and I it didn't click with me. I didn't like it, and I'll come back to the jump mechanic. Like it didn't click with me in a way that, like, I agree Double Dragon's jump mechanics are terrible. Castlevania also terrible, but there's a logic to that. And I think,
can I ask you sort of I feel like it's an important question here. Is earlier you mentioned, I don't know if I left this in the edit, but earlier you mentioned that you were using sort of used games a lot, and maybe that extends to the NES. But like, my question is, did you have a lot of NES games?
Yes,
like a lot, like so. I asked because like I was like, by the time I got around to the NES, which is like 10 years after you guys, right? It was very old at that point. And so like people were just getting rid of them. And so someone just gave me a bunch of NES games, right?
Yep.
So I had sort of a wealth of choices, right, to play. And so like if something wasn't fun or wasn't good, like there was no reason for me to invest a lot of time into it.
Yep.
Like knowing what I know of Aaron, a man I've never met, I think he's told me in the past that like it was more the case where like they would rent like one game, for instance, you know,
right.
More, and certainly I did that too. But I think when you have, and again, this is dangerous because I'm sort of putting words in Aaron's mouth here, but I have a theory about this, which is just that when you have less games to less choice, and I think that was more relevant back then. You are more willing to put up with stuff, I think, which is not to say like he was putting up with it, because it sounds like Aaron genuinely liked this game. But from my own perspective, like I had a bunch of NES games. So like if Jaws wasn't good or Ninja Gaiden was too hard for me as a kid, I would just go back to Mario, right? Or Kirby, right?
Sure.
Because there are games at that time that were, I think, better designed for sort of different types of players, right? People who are more, who weren't willing to put up with as much sort of jankiness, right?
Yeah.
Like you go back and play Kirby, it's Dreamland, like that feels like a modern game,
right?
And it's you know, it's an easy game. It's designed, I think, much more for like younger kids. But maybe that's why, I don't know. This is where I have sort of have issue with it, is like, I know that like not everything was Mario, but Mario did exist, like, and Kirby did exist. Like there were like examples of like really like pioneering and like human centric like user experience design on the same console.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, is it Data East that made the Karnov port for NES? Like they certainly made some choices, right? Like they knew Mario existed. Kirby, I think, was a later release. But they definitely made choices, right? Like the jump mechanic being so strange. And I mean, the game is not entirely without merit. Like I think I mentioned, like the swimming and the flying actually pretty fun and fluid. I don't know. I think like, you know, they were making some choices for whatever reasons. And I don't know what those are. Were they technical limitations? I've never played the Karnov arcade game. Is that how they did it in the arcade game? Does he like, you know, jump strangely in the arcade game? Is it, you know, there's lots of reasons why. You know, these are old 8-bit NES arcade ports may have been cut down or changed or differentiated for whatever reason. Or, you know, is the team inexperienced? Was it exactly what they wanted to make and it's perfect? Like, I have no idea. But I think you're right. Like Mario existing, Kirby existing, I don't know. Like some Nintendo games are hard because they're challenging. Some Nintendo games are hard because they're garbage. Like, and I'm not saying Karnov is garbage. Like, I know I've said that. But I also don't like, you know, I don't like Aaron loves Karnov. Aaron beat Karnov on original hardware in a sitting. Like, that's pretty impressive. Like, I don't want to like sort of like detract it from anybody's enjoyment of that game. And I will say it was like a frustrating yet fun experience to go back to and play the game, despite it not really having changed my mind, or, you know, or looking back through the game with a a lens, sort of a more modern lens, brought back those memories of when I played it when I was a kid, and frustrated me in the same ways that it frustrated me when I was a kid. Yeah, I don't know. I had something I was going to say. I forgot what it was though.
I've been watching Karnov in the background while you're talking, and this game looks bad.
I mean, you should definitely try it. I think that could be the final chapter in the Karnov saga. Is Josh?
I'm not exactly a neutral judge here, but I think maybe I should.
I could be wrong about that, but
I'm watching Karnov Ness full playthrough, no hits run. This must be Aaron.
Yeah, it's got to be.
I think he's the only one who has a cartridge. So
yeah. Oh, I think I was talking about Castlevania and Double Dragon to Aaron's examples about bad jump mechanics. I think I don't know that my argument holds any weight, because I think it's this, you could make the same argument for Karnov, but I think Castlevania in particular, like you can tell that they were making some very specific choices about how jumping worked, and how like getting hit and getting knocked back worked in those games. That is, I think, and I mean, to be fair, I played a lot more Castlevania than I have Karnov, but like is a little bit more predictable. Like in moving through Karnov doesn't feel as like precise and methodical as moving through and playing a game like Castlevania. Like Castlevania almost feels more like a puzzle game in relationship to Karnov, where Karnov feels a little bit more, I don't know if haphazard is the right word, but I guess less intentional.
There's a little bit of that like NES game slop, right? Sloppiness around the edges, right? To it, just looking at it. Aaron's gonna hate to hear that.
A man you've never met.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I see. I don't care. See, I'll never speak to this person. So I'll say what I want about this bad looking game. There's no consequences.
And I think maybe Aaron is right. Like the difference in plays philosophy, where Aaron has been interested in working around a game's.
He's a real gamer.
Frustrating mechanics or limitations, if you think of it that way.
He's not a little baby like us.
You know, playing Mario all the time. It's
Kirby.
Me, Easy Mario.
I played Celeste.
Yeah, I don't
know.
Oh yeah, that's true. I played Celeste. I beat that one.
I like Massacre games. Why did you play Celeste, Aaron? Huh?
I bet you Aaron's played Celeste.
He hasn't.
Oh,
I keep telling him to
play Celeste. It's wicked good.
Yeah, maybe like really prove your true skills as a real gamer.
Then you can talk to us about jumping mechanics.
Yeah, come back when you played a real game.
Oh, and to Aaron's point about me criticizing hard NES games when I play, where I just love on Dreamcast all the time. That's fair. That's a good burn. Well, I guess wrap this up. Thank you, Aaron, for sending in the great email and letting us know how you feel.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. We're making lots of jokes at your expense, but we appreciate you spending the time.
I tried hard not to make that many jokes.
It's true. It was mostly me saying things like how the game was bad, and there was that part where I said that he boy, I'm tired.
It's okay. Yeah, it's 11:30 on a Monday. Let's call it time of death.
Living life to the extreme.